Welcome to the Her Voice Shines podcast, where we celebrate the power, brilliance, and resilience of women everywhere. I'm your host, Shanasia Washington. Join us as we share inspiring stories and insights from extraordinary women who have found their voice and are making a difference. Together, we'll create a ripple effect, illuminating the path to visibility and empowerment. Let's break barriers, shatter ceilings, and lift each other up. In each episode, we dive deep into the journeys of women who have turned their challenges into triumphs and their dreams into reality. Whether you're looking for motivation, guidance, or a community that understands your journey, you're in the right place. Stay tuned and remember, let your voice shine. And just like that, we're back with another amazing episode of the Her Voice Shines podcast. And of course, I'm always hyped because it's one of my favorite places to be. We champion authenticity. We have such a good and fun time in 30 minutes. And if you guys have seen the track record, I don't skimp on my guests. I bring the absolute best stories, the absolute most authentic women to share this space with you. I'm your fabulous host, Shanasia Washington, located in the beautiful city of Houston, Texas. And like no other, I have another beautiful guest today. She'll come to the stage, tell us her name, where she's streaming from, and you guys know the drill. She jumps right into that story. Without any further waiting time, here's my very beautiful guest for today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm Cecilia Romero, based out of San Francisco, California. I'm a first-generation Latina college graduate who grew up 25 miles south of San Francisco in the Bay Area. After a 15-year career at various technology companies and experiencing complete burnout, I recently walked away from the comfort of a six-figure salary. The time and space led me to start my own small business this past April 2024. How did I get there? I lacked confidence growing up. I was the type of kid that never wanted to be called on in class and was painfully shy. Learning how to advocate for myself is a muscle that took me decades to cultivate. Being the first to head to college between my parents, I had no idea what I wanted to study. Eventually, I declared communication at the University of Arizona in Tucson, and I'm truly grateful for studying that major. Upon graduating, I moved back to the Bay Area in the heart of the 2009 recession. I made it my full-time job to find a full-time job, and after so many rejections, eventually an amazing boss took a chance on me. My first three companies out of college were at PlayStation, video games, at Tesla, electric vehicles, before they were popular, and at the Climate Corporation, a software company focused on products for farmers. In those roles, I was in various administrative roles supporting executives ranging from legal, operations, finance, supply chain, and people operations over the first about 7 years of my career. While in those positions, I was planning internal corporate events from boardroom meetings to offsites to company picnics to massive holiday parties and everything in between. I loved leveraging my creativity to design an event from scratch. That was all in parallel to gatekeeping and managing busy executive schedules. After the Climate Corporation, I moved on to various smaller startups and pivoted fully into supply chain and procurement at hardware companies. Supply chain essentially brings the designs from a mechanical and electrical engineer to life, from prototyping all the way to production. While I did not have a STEM degree, I worked very closely with engineering and over time learned their lingo. I always considered myself a guardian of the company's money, and it was my job to put the company and the supplier or vendor in the best position to succeed. The madness of 2020 upended supply chain, as we all know, and it was full steam ahead solving for company problems. I eventually started to see a black hole when it came to my career and started planning my next career move, which was taking intentional time off. I don't know if it's the Virgo in me or what, but I planned out a life sabbatical in 3 phases: explore, realign, and what's next. Explore was my no agenda phase. That was wake up and see where the day takes me. Realign was where I answered 60 plus questions for myself, ranging from looking back on the jobs I've had and listing out what I loved about them, to what can I compromise on in my next role, to what is the worst case scenario for my next career move, to what does 5-year-old me need. What's next was always about researching companies and roles, or perhaps starting my own thing, which is what I did. In April of 2024, I formally started working on Miss 7 by 7, my small business, which is an experience and events company here in San Francisco. Our mission statement is to create delightful experiences for travelers and locals alike, uplifting our city in the process. I have 2 offerings. One is a cocktail and mocktail experience, where over 2.5 hours, I host guests to explore 3 local San Francisco cocktail gems, enjoy bites, we discover local history, and visit at least one landmark. The other offering is event planning, where I match celebrations in support of a company milestone, holiday party, birthday, anniversary, you name it, to more than one of the 4,000 plus restaurants or bars in San Francisco, of course, based off of the vibe that the client is going for. The concept of Miss 7 by 7 came to me when I was super early in my sabbatical phase. I'm talking sabbatical phase 1, explore. And it just became the thing I couldn't stop thinking about. I absolutely love showcasing small business gems, and I'm personally aligned with what I'm doing today. Thank you.
Cecilia, guess what?
What?
Don't come on the stage and try to steal parts of my story, because what you see in front of you is self-work. I was also the girl in the class that did not want to be called on. Yes. I know you still can't tell now, but back then I could do the thing. Like, I could be the smart girl. I could be brilliant. I could get the task and get the straight A's. Into wanting to be the girl that wanted to raise her head and be in front of the classroom and doing the things Sinead just could not do. And I mean, for a very long part of my life until recent times. I want you to tell me about starting to shift into the voice of Cecilia, because they'll see Cecilia now on this podcast, see Sinead now on the podcast doing these things, and they're wondering, what were those shifting steps to help Cecilia say, okay, nope, I'm claiming my voice back, and I know that I have to do it. Walk us through that shift that helped you become comfortable enough to even be on the Her Voice Shines podcast today.
Sure. I think a couple different things. One, so I am an only child and had a very strict curfew in high school. And it was one of those things where it was like, what was the point of even going out? So I never did. And going to college, going out of state to Arizona and being around people in the dorms, my internships, working for athletics for 3 out of my 4 years that I was there, definitely helped get me out of my comfort zone. And once I started working at all the companies that I worked at, I was one of those people who was like, okay, I'm just going to let my work speak for itself. My remarks were always great when it came to company reviews, and my bosses knew they could depend on me. But I definitely wasn't maybe getting the promotion in what I would call like more of a timely manner. And I was always of the mindset of my work's going to speak for itself. And it really, honestly, it really wasn't until very, very recently that I realized I really needed to start tooting my own horn and making my work known and visible at the companies that I was at. Like, I'm talking 2021. That was really when I started focusing on managing up, because I was great at doing everything else, putting the company first, always being their guardian when it came to the best possible outcome for whatever challenge I was trying to solve. And it wasn't until I found my awesome coach, Joanna Levering of Copper and Rise, when she started pushing me to practicing this muscle. And for me, what ended up, I would say, me managing up and kind of what I figured out to be my bread and butter was I started putting together at the companies I was at a monthly recap of what I was working on and making it visible to my peers, stakeholders that were maybe a level or two below, and then the entire executive team. that was what really started getting me comfortable with, I guess, not necessarily, not just in the context of talking about myself, but most recently, the company that I left, I joined as supply chain hire number one. I grew out the department and had 6 direct reports by the time I left. And so, over time, as I was hiring, I was also showcasing what the rest of the team was doing. But it's definitely a muscle. I do remember like some male colleagues over the years just being like, yeah, and every one-on-one I have with my boss, I only talk about myself and my next possible career move. And I remember being blown away the first time I heard that. So I would say it was work in progress, because it really wasn't until I'm 36 today, about to be 37. So it really wasn't until my early to mid 30s that I started practicing the muscle of, tooting my own horn.
Oh my gosh. You know why I love this podcast so much? Because I have found so many. I'm like, how are we? You're in California, I'm in Houston, virtually living like almost the same life. I mean, I am not an only child. My parents have, my mother has 4 children, but I was raised by my paternal grandparents in the house as an only child. Very sheltered upbringing. And it took a long time for me to come out of my voice. And then it really wasn't until 2021. And so I started speaking my voice in corporate, same year. 2021 is when I finally had that first shift, and then I left later on in that part. So all of that time before, and in my book, I talk about this whole bragging aspect and essentially tooting your own horn that I really just brought into my work ethic, because I thought that work would speak for itself. I thought that someone would notice all the hard work I was doing, bring the promotion, bring the recognition, but it just didn't come that way. So to hear you say that, I know that so many women live this reality, is more important that you show up and keep doing the thing, keep working the muscle, and keep showing up.
Totally.
Now, you work for big name companies. You drop PlayStation, you drop Tesla, you drop these big name companies, right? And I think a lot of times when women are transitioning out to build a business, they think about, what can I leverage, right, from the past, the corporate side. Talk about packaging those skills, because you've of course gained some things there. I tell everybody that even though the last part of my corporate journey was very rough, I got a whole bunch of tools and skills that I'm still implementing in my business right now that actually sets me apart from a lot of newer owned businesses, right? I want you to talk about some of those skills that you are leveraging still, even though it may not look like the event space in corporate. But what are some of those things that you pulled out so that women can be inspired, that they already have some foundational building blocks to transition to something of their own?
Sure. And then just quickly, I want to say, I was fortunate that I did have a few bosses that would advocate for me when I wasn't in the room. And I think that's so huge. It certainly didn't happen everywhere. But I am thankful for the bosses that did promote me because they recognized the work. In terms of skills that I've been able to take away from each one of the roles that I've had, the bigger, here's the thing. PlayStation was my first job out of college, but it was I was only working when I was at work. And I was 22 when I joined PlayStation. And when I would leave work, I had no access to company email or anything. And so I was like, I want more. And I went to the other end of the spectrum by joining Tesla Next and was connected all the time. And this was back in 2011. So Model S wasn't even in production. The factory in Fremont only had 3 employees when I joined Tesla. And by the time I left, collectively, that factory had over 2,000 employees. So I saw a lot of growth in a short amount of time. But I remember people at the time thinking I was crazy for leaving a stable company like Sony PlayStation to go to Tesla, but I knew in my gut it was the right move. So one takeaway I would say is like, trust your gut. Trust your gut in those decisions. Like, people may not always understand why you're making a move, but if you are confident that it's going to be the right move for you, highly recommend you just do it. In terms of skills, I would say supporting executives at a high level, I definitely was able to get a lot of ins and outs. And in a lot of cases, I was in the room when decisions were being made. I was fortunate to be a part of a people operations team that was really buttoned up and cared about the candidate experience and the experience that employees were having, and being open and transparent around why decisions are being made. And to me, maybe because I majored in communication, or maybe because I've seen the impact of fragmented communication at certain companies versus companies that are really open around the decisions they're making, that's the number one thing I feel like I've taken away, and that lesson that I've learned over and over again. When I was in supply chain, negotiating with suppliers or needing to move things along, I was always clear around the why. I was always bringing the supplier along for the journey. Sometimes I had to convince a supplier to work with a really small Series A startup and share the story behind, if they get on board, their impact that they will have for the problem that we were challenged or solving for. So I think the biggest skill that I've learned, or lesson that I've learned over and over again, has been around being clear and direct and making sure your internal messaging, if you are at a company, matches what you are putting out externally. Everything that I'm doing with Miss 7x7 today, before I even formalized the business in April, I went through a values exercise to flesh out what I wanted my mission statement to be and my 4 values. And recently, I came to those to help guide me in a decision that I was making. And that is something that I strongly, strongly believe in. Because if you don't know why you're doing something or what your purpose is, that's going to resonate in whatever, branding or storytelling you're telling externally.
Very good. The communication piece truly resonated with me because I felt that in some of the places where I worked, that communication, as you mentioned, was very fragmented and it lacked authenticity. People just really wanted to know what the heck was going on. So I use that as like, okay, these are things that I do not want to happen in the field of my company when I go out and do it, my way. So some of the things were kind of learning pains of like, this is what not to do. This is what I don't want to do, just from the human experience. So thank you for sharing that, because I do share with many business owners that, that I coach and tell them about, building communication. That has to be knocked down like at the beginning. You need to understand the look, the feel, and really how you're looking to flow in terms of communication in your business from the onset, from the very beginning. So thank you for sharing that. I want to shift here to 7x7. You touched briefly on the services and the package that you offer. Let's talk about this name.
Sure.
Where did it come from? How did you land on it? Let us know what 7x7 is telling us.
Yes. So Miss 7x7, MISS, 7x7 comes from San Francisco, is a 7 mile by 7 mile radius. And early in my sabbatical, I was walking my dog all over the city. I would just choose a different neighborhood, go explore. And it was on one of those walks with my dog Bandit that the concept Cece's Cocktail Walking Tour popped into my mind. And again, it was the thing I just couldn't stop thinking about, to the point where I was like, okay, I'm going to pursue this and turn it into a business. And me answering those 60 plus questions in my phase 2 was like the final seal of approval of I'm going to do this. But it was actually before I answered those questions that Miss 7x7 came up for the name. And I was spitballing a bunch of different business names. And when that one rolled off my tongue, I was like, okay, I got to go see, is the website domain name available? Is the Instagram handle available? Like, the stars aligned. It was just available. But yes, the name comes from San Francisco being a really small city, 7 mile by 7 mile radius. And the 7x7, there you have it.
I love it. That's one question I will definitely ask, because I am curious as to where the 7x7 came from. I love it. Very, very cute. In reading your information and kind of digging around, you talked about being set apart. Something that sets you apart is your ability to take on risk. And we kind of talked about this a little bit in this interview. And I think what weaves it in when you talked about saying, hey, I'm standing bold in my decision. You talked about it even, transitioning to Tesla. That was a form of risk, going to a company that wasn't as stable, right? I want you to talk more about risk, the importance of taking risk, and what makes you continuously be a risk taker?
Sure. It's really interesting that I have this big appetite for risk because I would say growing up, I was probably the extreme opposite of being a risk taker, going back to like, please don't don't call my name, none of that. Then let me just be here by myself. And I think it's because I've worked at so many startups at various stages, from pre-seed to Series C to a public company or two. But I did knowingly join a startup in 2020 that only had 2 weeks of runway. I asked that, and before I accepted the offer, I was like, "What does your runway look like?" And they're like, "2 weeks, but we're expecting to close like a huge deal," which they did. I started the job, and 2 weeks later, I still had a job. Um, but I think, it, and maybe it's because I'm in the Bay Area and startups that fail, it's really accepting out here to, okay, your startup failed, so you're on the job market again. Um, People are like, great, what did you learn from it? It's not seen as a negative out here. It's more of the learning lesson, and failure is okay as long as we learn from something or learn something about it. And so I think for me, seeing the trials and tribulations of trying to find, the right product market fit, or trying to scale in a crazy amount of time, or hyper growth, there's always risk. And sometimes it's just you get lucky and it's timing and it works out. And other times you may have the best possible product, but for whatever reason, like execution isn't there. Um, but I think seeing this over and over again maybe got me just more and more comfortable with risk that led me down this path of taking the leap that I recently took.
Yeah, it's good, and it's definitely something as well. I think my risk appetite, like even if you would have asked me maybe in 2019, 2020, my risk appetite has probably 10x at least. And I'm finding that there is great reward in risk. You know what I mean? Like every risk option that you have to make, we're not going to say that it's going to bring a 10x reward or 20x reward, but the process of carefully calculating risk kind of is really
Right.
beneficial. It's really beneficial in your journey. And so many women need to hear that, because they will sit there and teeter and never take any risk and be in the same dead place until they leave this space, because there was never any risk. We want to know all the answers, and life is not about knowing all of the answers. It would
Mhm.
everyone would have the pie in the sky life, right? If we could all just live it and write it out and do the thing and make it plain. We were just not designed to be in this space without taking some form of risk to get to that next level of reward. So thank you for sharing that, Cecilia. And I think with you sharing your journey, I've actually seen in just this short 23 minutes of time that we've been together that you have a good handle on risk. So I'm so happy that you talked about that. Now I
Yeah.
want to talk about this space because you're still new. I still think that I'm fairly new in the entrepreneur space. I left in 2021, but I didn't start walking this thing out until 2022. In that period between 2021 and 2022, when I actually started walking it, I got to take some time off, which a lot of women don't get to do. And although I didn't go through a 60 question questionnaire, I was actually doing the work, the on the ground work, self work for myself. And that was dependent on my next level of freedom. A lot of women stay away from the self work because they know it's some hurtful.
Yep.
It's some hurtful parts. I don't want to go back through that experience. I don't want to go back through that pain, but you have to walk it out. I want you to talk to me about the importance of self work, because that 60 plus questionnaire that you were doing, it was unlocking parts of Cecilia that will be needed for the next journey. Talk about it. Was it painful? How did it feel going through that 60 question questionnaire? Because for me, having to walk back and do that self work, Cecilia, I came through some parts that actually brought me to tears. So I want
Oh,
you to.
yeah. Yeah, I definitely had those moments. The 60 questions I had curated for myself came from a total of 5 different sources. Some of the questions were questions that I had come up with, but I answered those over a 3-week period. And there were definitely times where I was crying as I was answering them, especially when I answered, what does 5-year-old Cecilia need to hear? That was one of them. Um, and I think for me, I would have not been able to answer those questions had I not gotten myself to therapy, which I started consistently again in 2021. And I had to be in the right headspace. Like, I answered those questions after my decompression time of phase one. I think sometimes you have to reflect back in order to move forward. That's my biggest takeaway from my sabbatical journey. And I recently went back to my responses for something. I can't remember what. And so I glanced over a lot of those questions, and it was a good reminder in the moment of, even though I had answered them months prior, of right, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, or why this is all so aligned with where I'm at today with Miss 7 by 7. Um, my journey is my journey. And although I've had some very, very difficult moments, I wouldn't trade them, even my quote unquote regrets of certain decisions that I've made. I wouldn't trade them because it brought me to the place where I'm at today. And I really feel like I'm the strongest I've ever been. Like, I fully have stepped into my own as part of this process. It's never too late. Like, I fully feel like I stepped into my own at the age of 36. Um, and I'm just owning my journey and who I am. And I think that's the biggest gift between being able to go back and make amends, even if you can't make amends with someone who's in your past because maybe they're not making amends with themselves or with you. I think you can still come to a place of acceptance of where they're at in their own journey and just say, that's where they're at today. There's nothing I can do to change it, and be okay with that. It's freaking hard. But yeah, and be okay with that.
Yeah, I felt that like a little bit, because you sometimes wish that some of those people were further along in the journey, or at least in a place sometime where they're with you, like in the time that you need them to be in the journey. But it doesn't always work like that. And then I'm learning myself to be okay with that. And I tell people all the time that this year in particular, specifically 2024, it has been such like I'm living a new life. Like I have an awakening that I didn't even have even when I left corporate in 2021. That was 3 years ago. And even that phase of me is old. So for me to get to this point and have this reflective place, now being able to connect with the women I do feel are divinely connected with me, even if it's just for a 30-minute conversation, gives me a whole different take on life. And that happened because I was willing to go and do the self-work and then forgive myself for all the things that happened, and then being committed to look at life from a different lens that's not so cloudy when you're in corporate. Right. You have all of these different things. So thanks for sharing that. I don't want us to leave, Cecilia, without you telling us. I know you told us a little bit, but I want you to say right here in this segment where we can find you, what information you want to give us to connect, so that our viewers and listeners have that information.
Absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I guess I'll give you my LinkedIn so you can link them in the show notes. And then in terms of Miss 7 by 7, miss7by7.com, MISS 7x7.com. And then on Instagram, if you're curious about a mocktail walking tour, I have some cute little reels on there. So if you're out visiting San Francisco, would love to host you. You can find me on Instagram at miss7by7.com, and I am on Threads, or excuse me, not .com, at miss7by7 on Threads also. Threads, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and miss7by7.com.
I love it. Now, this is the part of my show, Cecilia, where we cue to you for your final thoughts. I tell my guests all the time, if they skim across, and I say they, our listeners, our viewers, skim across this and see nothing but this part, I want you to give them a good, some great parting words, and then something that captures the essence of Cecilia. It's to you for final thoughts.
Sure. Final thoughts, I would say I betrayed my gut a couple times, knew in my gut it wasn't the right thing to do, and I did it anyways. And then it took me on a journey to regain confidence in my gut. So parting words, always trust your gut.
Those are great parting words. And she said there's times in life that she did not do that, And she's claiming it and saying that that's what she does now as a new outlook for Cecilia. And I love that for you. I want to thank each and every one, especially our esteemed hosts or our co-hosts. I like to say you guys are co-hosts because this is your story, right? I want to thank you so much for being here, spending some time with me on your day today. I always tell our listeners, our viewers, remember to let your voice shine because transformative things happen when you do. I will never leave without saying I love you. Until next time, I'll be back with another amazing guest on the Her Voice Shines podcast, and we're out.